right, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political, sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Hello, welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm here today with Stanford Graham. He is an international lawyer. He is also the executive director of Sanacor. They've created a truly fascinating product called the Cardio Miracle. So I'm super excited to be here with you today. It was such a pleasure to meet you 2 weekends ago now. The time's just flying, right? Yeah. Now, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. It's a beautiful Holy Friday. So
this is true. This is
significant
true
for so many of us. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those who may not be familiar, can you give us a little brief overview of yourself and how did you go from doing, international law and commodities to running this, Cardio Miracle product?
Yeah, no, it wasn't a straight line.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine so.
Oh, I had a really wonderful legal career that culminated in the last 10 years doing international commodity transactions, which was really a fascinating place to do business and meet some really remarkable people. And the travel was pretty interesting. I was over in Tunisia when Americans over there doing what they were doing with Gaddafi. I mean, that was an interesting time. But yeah, been a lot of places, met some very interesting people to put together some very interesting deals. Yeah. So from that, I feel like I got on the 12-step program to stop being a lawyer, just to stop practicing. And I did a few things. One was to launch a freeze-dried food company. I've been an athlete all my life. I've trained 5-6 days a week since high school. That's just been a pattern for me. And recognizing our bodies, it's one of the things that really inspired me about you, Courtenay.
Well, thank you.
As after we met, I did a little due diligence on you, and I've always regarded my body as sacred, mm-hmm. and as a gift, and recognized it was a very interesting intersection of mechanics and art, mm-hmm. And so. Yeah, I've been, like I said, I've trained 5-6 days a week all my life, and I've been cautious about what I feed my body, and so that interest after kind of graduating out of practicing law to starting a freeze-dried food company, because I wanted the benefit of eating what I wanted, wherever I was, mm-hmm. and not having to ask somebody permission or pull up to some window, to get some food from somebody that I had no idea where that food came from, or what condition their kitchen was in, or who was touching it, or what they were doing with it. It was so compelling to me. It still remains very compelling to me, Courtenay, that one of the most intimate acts that we engage in. In the Hebrew tradition, just sitting down for a meal is a sacrament. Mm-hmm. Sitting down to break bread on any day is a sacred act. Yeah. And one best performed with friends, right?
Yeah.
But I think part of the narrative that we've been experiencing over the last 2 years, mm-hmm. has been preceded by a significant effort to divorce ourselves, or to divorce us, humanity, from the earth that we live on and the food that it provides us.
For sure.
And so as a dad, I've got 5 kids, and growing up in our home, there were 2 categories of edibles: food and garbage. You know,
Yeah.
food was everything that, you know, that the earth gave to us and offered to us, and then garbage was everything else. And so it was kind of fun. We'd have friends over the home sometimes, and my kids would say, "Dad, can I have some garbage?" You know, landing on the ears of friends who weren't familiar with our lexicon. That sounded kind of funny. But there's so much that we ingest these days that is just not fit for human consumption.
Have you seen the video of this older woman who had in her closet a like a McDonald's burger and fries? And I don't remember how old it was, but it was decades old. I want to say it was 30 something years old. And she took it out and it was completely intact, like no mold, nothing, like completely perfectly intact decades later. Yeah,
That'd be interesting. Yeah, I haven't seen that, but it'd be an interesting experiment, you know, to see that nothing happens to that thing that you leave exposed to everything for decades.
Right.
It didn't even petrify. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, well, so I started that company called Elements Meals, and it's we're pursuing that. And while pursuing that, the founder of this company, Cardio Miracle, who's a good friend of mine, his name's John Hewlett. We've known each other for over 20 years, and he's a phenomenal man. He's 70 years old this year. He's in his 71st year, and you know, keeps the pace of a 40-something-year-old. He's remarkable. Met him through my father, and we've been fast friends for over 2 decades. Anyway, John asked me if I would consider helping him grow the company.
Mm-hmm.
He had been going through a business wilderness for years. He was in the finance industry, specifically in very sophisticated insurance instruments, and he had a near-death experience with his heart. Early onset cardiovascular disease, and he wanted to find a way to solve that didn't involve cracking his chest open. You know, with
they did that to me when I was 1 year old. Yeah.
I would like to understand a little bit about that. There's congenital challenges that you were born with. I mean, your story is fascinating me.
Thank you. Yeah.
So,
in the past 2 years, it's become more fascinating as I've learned more about the lies that we've been fed. And I'm realizing it may be a mystery that will remain unsolved for me personally. It's actually been quite a difficult journey for me in that regard. But yeah, to kind of wrap my head around some of the possibilities of what may or may not have happened. Yeah.
Wow. Well, so John asked me to come help him, and I got some really good direction on fairly good authority to engage with him. So I did, and one of the things that I knew that he had been involved for years in developing a supplement, a powder supplement that is a nitric oxide inducer. The body makes nitric oxide, which is a gas molecule necessary for life. Very simple in terms of chemistry, but remarkably complex in terms of its characteristics and functionality. John handed me a study that he had that had been performed on the product at Ohio University about 9 months before we actually sat down and chatted. And I spent several hours with that and came back to him and said, "Do you have any idea what you've got here?" And so I said, let's rock and roll. And we've been having fun it's been a year and a half since I've joined John. And it's been fantastic. One of the greatest blessings really has been meeting some of the most wonderful people.
Yeah.
That walk this this spaceship we call home. So
right.
So that's a little bit of the path. You know, I have an interest in health and nutrition. I've read science on that for over 3 decades. Self-taught that way. I'm an elite athlete. I run a 4:26 mile, and
Amazing.
I'm hunting down I'm coming up on breaking a world record for the 15 over men's mile. I know I'm getting closer to my 6th decade than my 5th. So
unbelievable. That's incredible. That's really amazing.
Well,
you said you've been an athlete your whole life. Were you always a runner? Was that your sport, or?
no, actually, I played basketball, and then one of my coaches told me, it competed with the skiing season. I grew up in Idaho, southwestern Idaho, and that I had to make a choice between the vertical and the court. I chose the vertical. I chose skiing.
Wow.
But I didn't play college sports. I was recruited mildly by a couple of coaches at BYU to walk on. They encouraged me to walk onto the football team as a tight end. I just thought, no, I like my knees too much. It's good. So
that's fair.
Yeah,
fair.
but just I know this, the value of movement. I mean, that's your mantra, right? Involves the blessings and outcomes of movement. And again, I think it's one of the larger arcs, one of the components, Courtney, of the larger arc we've been living through really since the 1970s is being persuaded to into a static way of life instead of a dynamic way of life.
Yeah.
Static instead of kinetic in so many ways. And so between that and what seems to be a planned effort to divorce us from the source of life, in terms of the earth, while simultaneously asking us to respect it, it's just crazy.
Yeah, right. They really mean respect it. But I think a lot of it, whenever I think about, movement to me is very holistic. I say it's fully integrative. It's mind, body, spirit, heart. It's all of it. But I think that there is, as you're saying, that this concerted effort to, increase the stagnation. And I think some of it is just because there is a plan to make us less healthy. That is just part of the plan. But I think it's
no doubt.
I think it's also because it's part of the plan to foster dependency. Movement teaches you, so that's really what I talk about. I mean, we all know the health benefits of physical, training. Like, I don't have to wax poetic about that, and there's enough scientific evidence to support it, and people can just live it and know. But I think a lot of people overlook, the mental fortitude that physical training provides. And I always say it's a great teacher to teach you to overcome adversity, because it's so tangible, and you have to struggle through to get to progress. No matter how talented you are, no matter how gifted, I always say, the most talented athletes don't get to the Olympics by sitting on the couch. It doesn't matter what advantages they have, what drugs they take, it really doesn't matter. They still have to put the work in. And any athlete knows that. And I think there is something about taking us out of that mindset of being able to push through things and to teach ourselves that we are capable. Because if we knew that we were capable, we might not put up with so much, and we might not be as dependent on various systems that they want to put in place. So.
Yeah, one of my favorite one of my favorite quotes is from David Goggins. Maybe not, I can't quote him specifically, but his thought of that really now the most dangerous thing is being civilized. Like, the most dangerous thing in the world is a civilized man, because he'll do nothing.
Yeah.
And he's about being he is about being an actually dangerous individual,
I think Jordan Peterson has a quote like that also, right?
He does, as a matter of fact. I was just, you read my mind. I was just reflecting on, Jordan Peterson's comments about controlling the monster,
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
which I think stems from Nietzsche, really, right? Wasn't that kind of Nietzsche's whole premise, the Übermensch? Yeah.
So I've landed here with John Hewlett in the Party Miracle Company, and when I told John, I want to get into this with you. I want to bring some friends. I've got two very close friends that we've done a number of things together, Brian Ingram and Joseph Hicks. And he said, okay. And so, I promptly gave them phone calls and said, guys, you've got to check this out. Brian played professional baseball, among other things. He's kind of a Renaissance guy. And then Joseph Hicks played tennis at university level. He was one of the best tennis players during his university years at Utah State University. But anyway, so we've had a blast over the last year and a half with this Party Miracle Company, because ironically, the reason we're together is because I was at this conference in Tampa. I've been asked to come and speak there because I'd made some comments, a lecture at, it was at G. Edwards Red Pill.
Okay.
David Martin was there, and anyway, this is the trail by which I met David Martin last summer. Watched a podcast. And I actually gave this Brian Ingram, this friend of mine, I said, hey man, have you seen this podcast? And he says, yeah, dude, I watched it yesterday. And I had watched about 7.5 minutes of this just to hear David Martin say, talk about his forensic patent work over the last 20 years or so.
Right.
On the development and ownership of injections, testing, and viruses. And when I heard him say a few words out of that webinar that we made SARS, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, I was following his argument, tracking the patents that he was identifying, stopped the podcast, picked up the phone and called Brian and said, did you hear this? He said, yeah. I said, well, now we have to do something because we know.
Right.
And Brian says, well, as a matter of fact, Dr. Martin's a good friend of mine. So you've got his number, and he sent me a screenshot from his contacts list on his phone, like Dr. Martin, Dr. David E. Martin, phone numbers. Let's call him, man. Let's call him. So we got David into the film studio of Jeff Hayes. We built films. Jeff Hayes is an award-winning docuseries filmmaker, and we organized within that 2 weeks to get David into Jeff's studio and be interviewed by Patrick Gentempo, like a 4-hour interview, which was phenomenal.
Wow.
Just phenomenal. And ever since that experience, then it was, okay, man, let's put the pedal to the metal with David and mix this stuff up. So it was interesting to me, Courtney, because as I listened to David, the reason I jumped on that was because when I heard him say, referencing the patents, that this pathogen is designed to target the endothelial cells of the human body.
Right.
And I took that personal because nitric oxide, this gas, simple gas in the body, is what the endothelial cells produce. The endothelial synthase molecules makes nitric oxide, and if it does so in plenitude for long-term periods, it heals the endothelium, which can be damaged just as a function of use, internal toxins, external toxins, et cetera, age, those kinds of things. And so its ability, the endothelium is this inner lining of all our blood vasculature, all our lymph vasculature.
Right.
It's the largest organ of the endocrine system, and and it's a monolayer that covers every interior surface of every blood vessel, capillary, microcapillary in our bodies. And these are the cells. This is the organ that creates nitric oxide, the endothelial synthase molecule. And so when David revealed that this pathogen, this protein, is designed to take out endothelial cells, then two thoughts. Number one was that is lethal, systemically lethal to humans, because the nature of the endothelium is to be a communication interface between the blood compartment, the interior of the blood compartment, and the data that the blood's carrying, and everything outside the blood compartment. It's the interface between those two components, blood and all interstitial tissue. So
I'm going to ask you about the interstitial. Okay, yeah, that's.
Yes, so it's the comms desk for the entire system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the comms desk between the supply chain and everything that needs the supplies. And that's the target. That's the target. So then the question was obvious to me. Well, then what are we going to do to help people protect that endothelium?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that began this little odyssey that I've had over the last year that's involved to a high degree Dr. Martin and some of the remarkable people that, you know, they're in, that orbit around each other, right? There's a great cosmology of wonderful people who are very, including yourself, who are very interested in humanities interests in a genuine and authentic sort of way, to see life as sacred and not as disposable.
Right. Yeah, and to restore the free will of humanity. You know, that's really, so just very quickly, I'll tell you, when I first started this podcast, I think people were kind of like, and even now, to be really honest, people are like, focus, girl, focus. Like, you know, you need to, you know, narrow down. And marketing is not my strong suit, but to me, there's so there's that. But for me, it is a central theme. It really is about preserving the free will of humanity. And I think we do that through, you know, sovereignty and taking personal ownership, you know, personal responsibility. And I think that I do really believe that that is very much at stake. But I think that having conversations like this is ways to, you know, inform people so they're armed with the education, because there is so much censorship. There's been very little, you know, we talked really briefly about this, very little education teaching how to think. There's a lot of indoctrination of what to think. And so then people become demoralized and they don't have the, you know, intellectual ammunition and the knowledge. And so then hopefully these conversations inspire people, you know, that they can find that, and then they feel empowered to take back some, you know, ownership. Because as I was saying with, you know, movement, I think that is a huge part of the agenda. It is to separate us from really what makes us human. And a lot of what makes us human is, you know, freedom of consciousness, the fact that we make choices and then we have ownership of those choices, you know, for good or for bad. You know, we reap those consequences and then hopefully we learn from them and then we pass them on to the future generations. So yeah,
very well. I agree. There's been an effort to divorce our choices from the consequences of choices as well. You know, I'm sure you know Jocko Willink speaks about extreme ownership, right?
Yeah, awesome.
And there isn't much of that around. That extreme ownership, meaning you know, extreme responsibility, just admitting that whatever's going on in your life, it's you.
Yeah.
You know, it really, so much of it comes down to choices that you've made and consequences of those choices. And there's very little dialogue about that in the more institutional lexicon these days. There's an antithetical argument that it's not your fault and you're not responsible.
Right.
Which is bullshit. And so,
And that's empowering.
yeah, and if people actually believe that, then, you know, the logical end of that stick, if you choose to pick it up, is that there's no control over what happens to you. And if you're not responsible for your actions and your something. And so it's an argument of don't rely on yourself, rely on other people, and more particularly, you know, rely on the state. Let's scramble the human family. Let's scramble human relationships.
Right.
And let's make the state the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right. So. Yeah. So what have you found with the Cardio Miracle, like in terms of this nitric oxide and how it helps people? And then you were talking about a study that recently, tell us about that.
Yeah, well, this what happens, you know, what can happen with two students of philosophy together. You know, let's see if we can stay on a.
This is why I do the long form.
On a physical target, you know, and stay out of the metaphysical. Well, we can still involve some of that, but
that's why I do the long form, is so we can do that.
I appreciate it. So Cardio Miracle is this is a nutraceutical that with 53 plus ingredients, broken into really two compartments. One is a combination of amino acids, which are the fuel that the endothelium needs to produce nitric oxide. Okay. So amino acids and vitamin D3, actually there's some D3 in an interesting form in this nutraceutical. And then there's this other compartment or component of ingredients that is comprised of fruits and vegetables, which are, you know, germanely called superfoods in today's parlance, but that's a little sloppy. Fruits and vegetables, botanicals, herbs, etc. Interesting things like white pine tree bark and some other things that have a remarkable capacity to engage with the body in some interesting ways. So the first test, I would take you back to this first test that was an in vitro test at Ohio University conducted by a Dr. Tadeusz Malinsky, who has hundreds of peer-reviewed papers and has published extensively on nitric oxide and vitamin D in the human biological system. Yeah. He actually has a nanotechnology lab at Ohio University, which was the first lab to measure in real time the production of nitric oxide by human endothelial cells.
Wow.
Which is staggering, yeah.
Yeah.
The first of anything is usually a pretty good indicator. So he tested the Cardio Miracles, the product in an in vitro study on human endothelial cells there in his labs. Endothelial cells taken from the interior of the heart, taken from a human umbilical cord, and a few other cells taken from other arterial sources in the body. And what he discovered was that when those endothelial cells were bathed in Cardio Miracle, there's immediate production of nitric oxide. And in amounts that he had never observed in his entire career. Amounts both quantitatively and durationally. So there was a large production of nitric oxide by these endothelial cells, and then for over a 24-hour period of time, which was 6 times any duration he had ever seen endothelial cells produce nitric oxide based on any other kind of formulation or initiative or substance. So he was staggered by that. He's never seen so much, not seen nitric oxide produced over a 24-hour period of time. The second thing that really surprised him, Courtenay, was that when nitric oxide is produced, it makes the exhaust of that production is called peroxynitrite, which is in my personal conversations with Dr. Malinsky, he told me that it's the most destructive free radical in the human biological system, that it can fracture DNA. And I said, well, that's kind of ironic that the body, in making a gas molecule, nitric oxide, that is essential for life, is much equally essential as oxygen and carbon dioxide, in that exchange, for breathing, that the production of nitric oxide would kick off the most lethal molecule in the body. That's kind of ironic. There's some beautiful irony with that, And he said, well, so what he found was that where with Cardio Miracle, there was this significant production of nitric oxide, but a downregulation in the production of this free radical molecule, like by 50%. And so he was just enamored with this, what he called a magic ratio, this wonderful ratio between the production of this very healthy molecule, nitric oxide, and this most dangerous molecule, peroxynitrite, which happens to be an inevitable outcome of that nitric oxide production. So those are the two major findings. And then he reached conclusions that said, look, this type of nitric oxide production needs to be studied further with this product, because it's clear that this could significantly impact in a positive way the creation of chronic inflammatory diseases.
Wow.
It could terminate their growth and cause their regression.
Wow.
This should be studied. So he said, this should be studied further.
Yeah.
So we did. So we jumped into this study that I was telling you a little bit about before we started. So we made a decision last fall to retain a wonderful biotech company called Emergent Systems Analytics. They're out of Connecticut. Two remarkable scientists there, Shama Kijiji and Anton Fleary, who have a very long history in the the large pharma world. They've come over from the dark side. But they have lots of publications to their name. They've got several patents to their name of pharmaceutical products that have actually made it to market. So wonderful people, beautiful people, very accomplished, brilliant people. And so their firm, Emergent System Analytics, what they do is what is called in silico testing, which is based on in their case, a patented artificial intelligence capacity.
Wow.
Part of this in silico testing is really mathematical modeling based on massive data sets. So for instance, we asked them to take a look at our entire ingredient list of over 53 ingredients and determine the interaction of molecular networks found in each ingredient and how those molecular networks interacted with every other molecule or molecular network in every other ingredient in every possible combination of those things.
Wow.
Which if you try to do in an in vivo or in vitro study, I mean, you can't do that. I mean, you test for a molecule because you have a control group, right?
Yeah.
That typical in vivo or in vitro models, just the control groups have to be so tight.
Yeah.
And you're really testing for one, maybe two molecules and their efficacy in one particular very specific modality. Where with in silico testing, they pulled data from over 17 million scientific papers.
Wow.
That were studies on the ingredients in the product, in the Cardio Miracle. So 17 million plus scientific publications, as well as the human genome. And taking all of that data and figuring out which protein sets were most relevant and anyway, it's just a fascinating way to approach scientific experimentation. And in fact, the FDA has been a strong proponent of in silico testing for the last 10 years because the predictive quality of it, Courtenay, is virtually equal to in clinical in vivo studies, clinical in vivo studies.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and so you can imagine the kind of money that you could save not doing in vivo clinicals where you can derive outcomes that are virtually, that are statistically as accurate as those studies without endangering humans or animals.
Yeah.
You know, and getting the results faster and more accurately, because of course the in vivo studies are always difficult because the control group, the controls are very difficult to control.
Right.
And everything depends on that, you know, how tight those are actually run, right? So that your outcomes aren't compromised, the data isn't compromised that way. So it's an absolutely fascinating methodology, but what came out of it was, I remember the phone call. I was on a phone call where we were talking to Anton, who's just this beautiful mind chemist, among other things, you know. John had asked them specifically to look for how the ingredients of Cavior Miracle and the production of nitric oxide, based on our prior in vitro study, how that affected the production of vitamin D. Because we were seeing that in all of our customers, all of our clients who were taking Cavior Miracle were seeing remarkable increases, very quick increases in their vitamin D levels.
Wow.
Like some by 60 points, 70 points in the course of 30 to 60 days.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I feel like everybody today is vitamin D deficient. It's astounding.
And so, yeah, there's a paper published in 2010 that talked about, well, that said there was a pandemic in 2010 because of the lack of vitamin D in over 70% of the world population.
Yeah, wow.
And that portended something bad.
Yeah.
Hey, here we are, you know.
Here we are.
So, here we are.
Here we are.
Those damn prophets, you know. So.
Yeah, the prophets that have no hands in anything. So
yeah, plan for things. Yeah. It's like my dad used to say, the best temptation or the worst temptation is the kind you plan for. That's the worst, you know.
Exactly.
So John asked the Emergent System team to identify the source, to try to figure out what the connection was between Cavior Miracle as a therapeutic supplement and the production of and vitamin D levels in humans, because we were seeing that all the time. People were calling us with that all the time, and not just verbally. We were getting actual medical documentation back from customers saying, "Look what happened! Look what happened!" And then seeing other kinds of consequences, like I have kidney disease, and now all my markers are in normal ranges, and they haven't been that way for 4 years, but literally, Courtenay, 45 days later, they're all in normal ranges. It's like a friend of mine told me that about his wife, and I just, it was a slack jaw moment. Like, you're kidding. Hey, no, she just went to the doctor today, and here are her numbers. I mean, it's stuff like that. So Tony Anton gets on the phone to report to us, give us initial report on the production of what's the connection between vitamin D in the body and those levels increasing when people go on this Cavior Miracle thing. Right. And he's Austrian, right? And so he sounds like Arnold Schwarzenegger to a degree. It's harder to understand. His accent is so beautifully thick. But he started the conversation this way, Courtenay, to John Hewlett, the founder. He says, "Damn it, John, you are right. There is a connection. Because John's not a doc. He doesn't have a PhD or a white coat or stethoscope. And Tony was just like, damn it, John, you're right. How did you put this together? And so here's what we discovered. He said there is what he called a beautifully exquisite, or exquisite, I'm sorry, an exquisitely beautiful feedback loop. Mm-hmm. He says, here's what happens. And he has a paper submitted for peer review right now. Okay. That will be published pretty shortly. I would say within the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Great.
By a top medical journal. He said, look, here's what happens. That cardiomiracle induces this significant production of nitric oxide. And that production of nitric oxide signals to the fat cells in the body to release inert vitamin D, which is stored there. I never knew that.
Yeah.
I never heard that vitamin D was stored in fat cells.
Yeah. Yeah. They say that you absorb the vitamin D mostly like through the trunk and like your butt, basically, like if your skin is bare, and that's stored for the winter. So during the summertime, you're supposed to get exposure, and it actually stores to fuel you for the winter. And vitamin D, very much, a lot of people don't know, it's almost like a hormone, the way that it interacts with
exactly
fat cells in the body.
Yeah. And so this vitamin D messages, it's a signaling molecule that was discovered in 1998. The Nobel Prize was given to these 3 scientists who actually figured out that nitric oxide is a signaling molecule. It's the primary signaling molecule of the body. Like, it starts synthases, it starts processes, it communicates with other cells to begin processes that they've got to begin and pursue and shut down other things. It's amazing. Yeah. But it's a communication molecule. So it's telling the fat cells, hey, release that inert vitamin D, which then travels over to the liver and is hydrolyzed there. It becomes calcitriol, and then it goes to the pancreas and is processed secondarily through there. And then becomes remarkably bioavailable to the body because it's endogenous, which is much better. Yeah. Apparently. So anyway, you see this massive upregulation in production of vitamin D that has remarkable bioavailability. The next thing that happens is that process of vitamin D production induced by nitric oxide signaling affects what is called caviar-mediated endocytosis. So all cells have a plasma membrane on the exterior of the plasma wall. And when the cell is healthy, that plasma membrane has a bunch of these little caves, these caveolar. They look like little indentations in the plasma membrane, and they're actually transport hubs. They function as transport hubs for the ingress and egress of data and material into and out of the cell. Okay. And so this production of nitric oxide and upregulation of vitamin D production has a very positive impact on this caviar-mediated endocytosis, meaning that these transport hubs become more numerous, and instead of being shallow, they become deep. And more, which they need to be in order to affect their function, to be functional. So the cell becomes healthier and more receptive to the data it needs to receive from whatever source, because now it has more transport hubs, and they're more available, and they're healthy and can function. And as this is going on, you then have this CME, or caviar-mediated endocytosis. As that process is going on, what then occurs is that you get a downregulation. That causes a downregulation in TGF-beta and TNF. which are these massively dangerous cytokines, right? These inflammatory macrophages that are precursors to atherosclerosis, to cancer, to diabetes. Well, those are downregulated significantly. Caveolin-1 is downregulated significantly. So cell autophagy increases, which is very helpful. So, and then it's a feedback loop. So that's the feedback loop that all of that, again, induces more production of nitric oxide from the endothelial cells, because this CME process is actually happening on the surface of the endothelial cell as well. So the endothelial cells become healthier and they function better and more efficiently. And so the efficacy, it's this remarkably propelled feedback loop. And Tony says, this is never, on that call, he says, guys, this schema, this process has never been observed in any of the literature. We've never seen it before. Can I write about it? And so, so he told John, I would be happy to write an article on this process. John.
Right.
So it was fascinating, because to see the interconnectedness between, well, even like you have a downregulation of interleukin 1 and interleukin 6 as well.
Right.
So when you start putting those things together and think, we could actually induce that kind of a feedback loop, that beautifully exquisite feedback loop, by doing what? The body's, here's that part of when we talked about, the body being a beautiful combination of mechanics and art. It's of engineering and art. This is part of that beauty.
Right.
What the body can do for itself, to heal itself, to
Yes.
improve itself, if nothing else does. The body is the thing.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to the point earlier, just philosophically speaking, because I think that's kind of the big, the big piece they don't want us to know, is that, the body is designed to heal itself. And
Yeah.
that, if we give it the right environment to heal, that is its, we're survival creatures. That's why we're still here.
Yeah, here we are. We are.
So if you, give it the right environment to do so, it will do whatever possible to survive. So I think a lot of the things that we're being told are to think that we need to be dependent on other things to create that, to somehow kill off, essentially, when that's the opposite of what really the body needs. What the body needs is to help it thrive and help things live. Like one example is like the carbon. It's just, the most obvious kind of things, right? We need to get rid of carbon because that's the problem, but it's literally the life molecule, like literally. Yeah. So, but I could go on and on. The examples are countless, but they tell us to kill off things that are literally what we need to survive. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in relationship to your practice and theory of movement, there's an interesting combination or intersection between that and nitric oxide production as well. There's a very interesting environment that exists between the endothelial cells, which is the interior of your blood vessels, and the blood. These endothelial cells, Courtenay, are the only cells that have direct contact with your blood.
With your blood.
So they're very specialized. Yeah, they're the only one to have the direct contact with your blood. So one of the things that they do is they persuade your blood to stay liquid. Isn't that fascinating?
Hear that.
To persuade your blood to stay liquid, to maintain its liquid character.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because when blood contacts other cells, it has a tendency to become a solid.
Right.
And so these endothelial cells encourage its liquidity, that characteristic
So they would be a great antidote to clotting or a prophylactic to clotting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as it happens, the endothelial cells' purpose is in part to prevent the adhesion of stuff to the interior of the blood vessel. It's like Teflon. It's supposed to keep the interior of your blood vessels thick. I'm sorry, slick.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
Like a Teflon coating, so that platelets don't aggregate, so that lipids don't aggregate, so that because these endothelial cells have tight bonds of different natures that allow large molecules like oxygen through their wall, kind of like your gut microbiome is built to allow certain things in and keep certain things out, and the endothelial cells are the same way. They know what to allow in terms of amino acids and proteins and larger particles, et cetera, and what to keep out.
Right.
But this relationship between the blood and those endothelial cells, this interior surface of the blood vessel, is very interesting because as it relates to movement, when we move, our blood, the blood speed increases.
Right.
And the reason that's important is because the blood actually causes a shear force against the blood vessel interior wall as it speeds up. And that shear force is actually a mechanical force. And that mechanical force, that shear force, induces the endothelial cells to produce nitric oxide.
Huh.
So if you ever, when you're out moving and exercising and you begin to feel good,
Yeah.
exercise brings energy,
Right.
enhances oxygenation.
Yeah.
That's one of the main reasons why, is because that movement speeds up, increases the speed of the blood. That increased speed of blood increases the mechanical force of the blood against the interior wall of the blood vessels, against the endothelial cells, which causes them to create nitric oxide.
Wow, that's fascinating. I was thinking about, I don't know if you're familiar with Andreas Nowak. You are, yeah. And he talked about the graphene hydroxide. And
Yes.
he said that the faster the blood runs, that the more it acts like a razor blade in the cells. And so that's part of why the athletes are having more of a problem with some of the injections than the general population. Because it's kind of shocking.
Oxide molecules, it's quite fascinating.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, really, really fascinating. I wonder what the how that interacts with the endothelial cells and the nitric oxide. That would be interesting to see.
Yeah, well, it makes this these spike things. Here's where the conversation gets dark, because their target is that endothelial cell. In fact, one more comment I would say is that one more interesting fact is that all of our microcapillaries, really, which comprise about 90% of our vasculature, are made of only endothelial cells.
Wow.
So, the arteries that are coming out of the heart, right, they're very muscular. They're very muscular. They've got 3 different types of tissue. On the interior, they have these endothelial cells, and then they have a more flexible tissue around them, and then a more muscular tissue around them. But as the vascularity decreases in size in terms of its interior diameter, from the arteries down to smaller arteries and then to capillaries and microcapillaries, the vasculature evolves from those 3 layers down to 2, down to a single layer, and that single layer is comprised exclusively of endothelial cells. So, 80 to 90% of your vasculature is exclusively endothelial cells. And if you think that the pathogen is designed to take them out, and so your vasculature, all your microvasculature and all your organs
Wow.
is endothelial cells.
Yeah.
and all of your muscle tissue. I mean, so it makes the plan to take that, to make that the target, those specific cells, the target of the pathogen, remarkably dangerous.
Yeah.
And effective.
Very.
And effective. In fact, the first autopsies that were done on COVID deaths were done in Sweden in March of 2020. And that team of pathologists opened these folks up, and the publication that came from that study was that they found that the blood vasculature was littered. That's the verb they used, littered with dead cells and microclots. The microblood clots were ubiquitous. They had never observed that kind of condition before, so they hypothesized its cause. They hypothesized that whatever the virus was, that it was attacking the endothelial cells, and as a consequence, causing the clotting, which was a function of perforating the endothelial cell. The endothelial cell is actually, in nitric oxide, are the first. They're the first. Nitric oxide is the first messenger to communicate to the immune system something's wrong, whether it's a crush injury, regardless of the type of injury or regardless of the type of pathogen, that the nitric oxide produced by the endothelium is the messenger, and the endothelium itself participates in this messaging of there's a problem here, send the cavalry. Right. And then also kind of like an avalanche beeper system, if you've gone snowmobiling or skiing, you put if you're doing some backcountry stuff, you've got a nice beeper on in the event of an avalanche so you can be located. Well, the endothelium has that kind of system where it actually provides that kind of signaling to the inflammatory cells, so that when they come through the blood, they actually hit the interior of the blood vessel wall and slow down. So they orient themselves right to that point where the signal of injury is coming from, or where the signal of danger is coming from the endothelial cell. Wow. So very fascinating, because the endothelial cells are built that way to actually slow down the inflammatory molecules as they begin to hit that interior of the blood wall. Rather than preventing their adhesion, they encourage it because they're needed. So I find that once the spike protein gets inside the endothelial cell, then it causes the production of more spike proteins, which then perforates the cell from the inside out. Right. And this has been observed now from the time that the pathologists in Sweden first hypothesized what was causing the clots, and they said it was endothelial damage, to I think it was in August of 2020, Peter Libby, who has the chair of cardiovascular medicine at Harvard, said, "Hey, this infection is an endothelial disease." Wow. And then in September of 2021, an Italian team of researchers published a study in The Lancet that said, yeah, this pathogen versus infectivity is eclipsed by the lethality of the pathogen. It's like the virus doesn't even matter. It's the thing it's carrying. Right. And that the Italian team had concluded, look, yeah, this is an endothelial disease. We've proven it. And in that same study, they conducted on a population of severe virus cases. Mm-hmm. All those folks had been hospitalized with severe conditions of this virus. 50% of them got the placebo. The other 50% received 6 milligrams of L-arginine orally administered per day. The folks that got the L-arginine, their hospital stay was cut in half, and they actually left the hospital.
Right.
And so that study concluded that team concluded that L-arginine reverses the dysfunction. This is a quote: reverses the dysfunction of the endothelium caused by the pathogen.
Wow.
So they said, look, if we diagnose this virus and the symptomology that it causes as an endothelial disease, we can then develop a rational framework for treatment. That's a quote. We can develop a rational treatment for rational framework for treatment. And their treatment was L-arginine.
Well, that's
6 grams a day, orally administered, twice a day, 3 grams each, and radically affected the severe patients. They left the hospital, got their oxygen back. Go figure. I wonder how that happened. And then no ventilation. And then, and they left, right? They started doing it, and they left that den of thieves. Anyway.
Wow.
So fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
And as it happens, the primary amino acid in Cardiomiracle is L-arginine.
Right. Right.
And there's L-citrulline, because L-citrulline actually gets processed and metabolized into L-arginine as a second phase inducer for nitric oxide. So anyway, it's been a fascinating ride. That's how I went from being a lawyer to talking to you this morning.
Yeah, that's quite a journey. I'm curious with nitric oxide, because I always think of, things are kind of an ecosystem. The body's always looking to maintain homeostasis. So
yeah,
there's always, it's hard to know with anything. There can be too much or too little, right? That's usually, it's always looking to find balance. So how do people know, like, is it a one dose fits all kind of thing, or how does that work? And obviously people who have been, exposed to some sort of toxin that's going to affect their endothelial cells, they have a different need than somebody who might be healthy, looking for more prophylactic kind of.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I'll answer this a couple of ways. Number one is, one of the things that John Hewlett, the formulator, asked Tony, in Shama at the Emergent System Analytics, the folks that do the in silico studies, is John asked them to prioritize the ingredients in terms of importance or efficacy.
Right.
And Tony says, yeah, I can do that. But this, he said, John, it was a beautiful thing. He says, John, this isn't about an ingredient. This is about an orchestra.
That's great. Yeah.
You have an orchestra of 53 different instruments, ingredients in your composition.
Right.
They all matter, because we've proven that they all interact in this very specific, in a very unique way. So they've actually figured out how all these different ingredients in the over 770 mechanisms of action interact with each other to create this outcome that was measured in this feedback, this beautifully exquisite feedback loop.
Right.
And we're just getting started. That's just the first thing. And so he says, it's not about, I thought that was a brilliant answer, an observation from a beautifully minded chemist. To say it's not about an ingredient, it's about the orchestra. It's the orchestra.
Because a lot of different,
so many,
they act as cofactors so they act with each other. Yeah.
Yeah. Figuring out how they all interact together, and then taking that orchestra and putting that in something as complex as the human body.
Right.
Right. Where you have the liver tissue is different than pancreatic tissue.
Sure.
Which is different than pulmonary tissue, which is different than heart tissue. I mean, so your question is prescient, because the one thing that's common in all those organs is endothelial cells, is the delivery mechanism of the data in the liquid organ, the data in the blood. And on the one hand, there's this wonderful complexity, right? On the other hand, there's this beautiful simplicity where the blood is the life.
Yeah.
And getting the blood, I grew up on a small farm in southwestern Idaho, and my dad, I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters. I'm number 2 of 9. And my dad would always say, because farming, you irrigate stuff. In Idaho, you irrigate because it doesn't rain enough to keep things alive, except the weeds. So we'd be moving the irrigation pipes, and he'd always say, be sure to get the water to the end of the row.
Right.
They always say that.
Okay.
And if you've ever done, drive by any kind of agricultural community, you see that the consequences of effective irrigation, because either the plants at the end of the row are stunted and sick or dehydrated. When then, things get healthier the closer you get to the center.
Yeah.
So getting the water to the perimeter was very important. And as a metaphor, it's really the way our bodies function. These microcapillaries are that perimeter. It just so happens that with our body, the perimeter happens to be the center as well. Like they're defined the same way, because everywhere's the perimeter and everywhere's the center, right? Because all the tissue matters equally.
Right.
But getting the water to the end of the row, so maintaining the health of these endothelial cells so that your capillaries function to carry nutrition and hydration and everything else that the interstitial tissue needs is critical. We see what happens when that fails, Courtenay, like in diabetes, when they start chopping feet off.
Right.
You start losing your vision. It's because the blood isn't getting to the tissue.
Right.
So it's very simple.
It has no nutrients.
On the one hand, there's this remarkable complexity, but on the other hand, it's look, the blood is the source of life. There is a system for carrying the blood. So let's do what we can to make sure the blood is healthy, that it's carrying the right data, and that the transportation system is functioning.
Right.
And as it happens, there are 3 common denominators to every inflammatory disease, every chronic inflammatory disease: blood supply, right?
Yep.
Blood oxygen levels, ischemia, right?
Yep.
And then low blood supply, low oxygen, and then dangerously low blood pressure, just blood not getting where it needs to go.
Right.
And so these 3 common denominators for all chronic inflammatory diseases tells you something about the nature of inflammation.
Right. And inflammation is kind of the cornerstone of the hallmark of all disease, really.
Yeah. Not that inflammation's bad, but persistent.
Right.
Misinformed. Talking about misinformation, the age of misinformation, misinformed inflammation.
Right.
Where the immune system thinks something is wrong, but there's no more emergency, but they're still reacting, still sending out the cavalry and everybody else, and not realizing that, still hunting for a problem when there isn't one. It just so happens that, now the adrenal glands are producing more cortisol to try to tell the immune system to shut the heck down.
Right.
Right.
Totally.
But the immune system loses its ability to hear the cortisol to turn off.
Right.
So the adrenal glands keep pumping stuff. And the immune system keeps responding to that. And so we're living in this, as you know so well, we're living in this condition, so many people living in fear,
Yes.
because that's, again, part of the plan is to make us afraid. Because when we're afraid, our adrenal glands do something.
Yeah.
And the immune system has a response to that,
for sure.
which is natural. And under normal circumstances, without information about, let's see, what are we supposed to be afraid of now? What's the latest thing, right? Just keep us in a state of constant fear, and the body, the biological systems go to hell. I mean, we can't live that way, particularly when we're not in fear. I mean, when we're not in danger.
Right. It was designed again for survival. So we were supposed to be afraid. The fear signal of fight or flight is if a bear or tiger is coming to chase us, so that we don't just say, oh, okay, we get up and do something, but you can't, that's not sustainable. I'm going to be in that, adrenalized state for perpetuity. That's not
so, and you know this, so let's just connect another dot, because in that state of fight or flight, one of the things that shuts down when everything else turns on is our brain.
Yes.
Critical thinking terminates.
Yes.
The brain prevents critical thinking under those conditions, because you don't have time to think.
Right. Yeah.
That's the biological wiring.
Yeah, because that's going to
hinder. Yeah, you're not supposed to calculate.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're not supposed to calculate the speed at which the tiger is coming at you in order to figure out when you start to run. So you got 100 yards, it's going this way. No, it's just run. So I think it's interesting that where there's a dearth of critical thinking, it just might be connected with the biological processes of the people that are kept in a state of perpetual fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what, no surprise. I mean, people aren't thinking because they can't. Their body actually won't let them do it.
Yeah, no, that's right there. Yeah, which I do think is by design. I think that's exactly what they want. So that I'm curious your thoughts on like the I know some of the people you mentioned have said they're working on alternative systems, which I think we very desperately need. So I'm curious, just with your understanding of how, like the interstitial system and, the interworkings of the body, and how some of these, synthetic materials have targeted those systems, very contrary to the knowledge that's being propagated. So all this to say, what are your thoughts on like the current medical system and where things are going, and what some solutions and things people can think about, and framework shifts?
Yeah.
That was a broad question, so answer as you wish.
No, it's a good question. So if you want to understand what drives a hospital,
right,
institutionally, in terms of providing medical services, you got to look at their accounts receivable.
Right.
Where do they get the most money?
Right.
What are they doing that's driving that bus, right?
Follow the money.
That's right. And as it turns out, over 70% of the revenue comes from the cardio-related services.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, they do say that's the #1 cause of death, at least in the United States. I don't know about globally, but
yeah, there couldn't be any connection between those two. I mean,
no, must be random.
You wouldn't want to set people up to fail cardiovascularly so that you can charge them for it.
It's an interesting coincidence, yeah.
Why don't we pay a couple of guys over at Harvard to say that fat's the bad guy and not sugar? Let's do that.
Sure. Right.
Right?
Right.
And then let's lace all our low-fat food with lots of sugar.
And chemicals. Chemicals.
Chemicals.
And I think that's people really undermine that they think they just replaced it with sugar, but then you look at all these ingredients, and there is not every ingredient that you can't pronounce is necessarily dangerous. I mean, if you
Correct.
look at the chemical structure of broccoli, that would look pretty scary to most people.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to pronounce. But
that's right.
But a lot of these things that are put into to replace what was, because they demonized fat, and then they, spiked up the sugar, and it wasn't naturally sourced sugar either. I mean, this is a lot of artificial sugars and chemicals, and
pretty colors.
Right, exactly.
Pretty colors and flavors,
I have people all the time when they tell me like their cholesterol is up so they can't eat eggs. I'm like, no, maybe stop eating and eat more real food, and stop eating, World War II artillery grease, and maybe your cholesterol levels. Because, when you're talking about like the transports in the blood, and how, it's like inflammation actually does a job of carrying out the toxins, and cholesterol is the same way. I mean, it's in the blood. It is literally the toxin transporter. So it's not the enemy. It's doing
not the enemy, right?
And when it's elevated, it means that there's more toxins that it's eliminating. So again, you're targeting the symptom instead of the cause, which I think is a big that's a huge paradigm shift that I think needs to happen.
It's interesting because you take a look at ingredient list of packaged foods, highly processed foods. Inevitably, the ingredients will include enriched something, enriched something, and then flavors, where it's either natural or not, natural flavors or flavors, and then colors.
Yeah, Red Lake.
It sounds like packaging,
Red Lake 40. Yeah.
And so, yes, well, if there was anything good to eat in there, it wouldn't need to be enriched, and you wouldn't need to make it look prettier. You wouldn't need to, take your permanent markers to it and then add some flavor, So.
And the new one is that GMOs are now being labeled as biofortified. So they keep changing, biofortified. So they keep changing the labels because they want to send you like a snake chasing its tail, because there are a lot of people. I always say the Great Awakening will combat the Great Reset. And I am a really big believer in that. That's part of why I do this. But I think people are starting to wake up. So as people wake up, they have to change the language. Essentially, they change the vernacular so that they confuse people and throw them off target.
So that's definitely part of the plan. So institutionally, what's happening, even at higher levels, like we have the World Health Organization, which has a World Health Assembly. Mm-hmm. And they've put this in print. I mean, I can send you some documentation. It's fascinating to actually read what they print.
Great, yeah, read the white papers. Yep.
Yeah, because the WHO has now identified the 20th century as the century of treatment, and they've labeled the 21st century as the century of the vaccine. So, that initiative was started, well, actually it kicked off. It was launched a little late. It was launched in 2005 with a little bit less portentous title. It was, let's start the decade of the vaccine in 2005.
All right.
Let's prepare the planet to be amenable to a permanent vaccine platform. Because after all, it's the decade of the vaccine. And everybody knows that vaccines help people.
Right.
Then we're just going to expand that to this will be the century of the vaccine. At the same time that's going on, Courtenay, the World Health Organization changes its definition in 2009 of pandemic, right? What needs to happen in order to label something a pandemic? Because after all, who gets the right to do that? And by the way, who gave them that authority? But to make a change on their website in 2009 of a pandemic that removed any quantitative metric or any severity metric.
I posted it on Twitter side by side. Yep. Yeah,
it was just boiled down to a vanilla. Well, any new virus to which the human population has no immunity. That's the low bar of satisfying a pandemic nomenclature. So, they made the change just a month before they declared the H1N1 swine flu pandemic, which turned out to be a nothing burger.
Right. A good testing ground. Yeah.
Yeah, it was testing ground, and even the European Council called them out on it. Ironically, they saw that the change in the definition in the time in relationship to the declaration of the swine flu pandemic was bordered on criminal.
Wow.
They called it, the European Council said, hey, this doesn't look very good. And there's no evidence of a pandemic. They did this analysis 2 years later, after the numbers start coming in, and said that will cause, they actually put this in print in their write-up against the WHO, is that will cause, this has caused you have gambled away, that was the term they used, you have gambled away the credibility of the institutions. This will cause future harm, because if something does happen in the future, people will not be amenable to get vaccines.
Wow.
Because you've lost your credibility. That was in 2011.
Right.
And so, yeah. So I think that the institutional medicine is pushing that direction, because now we know, based on some SEC filings of Pfizer and Moderna, that their ability to manufacture viruses is really the same as creating software.
Yep. Well, and the website says that they say that it is like a hardware, and you will need a software upgrade, and it's an operating system. They literally say that on the website.
Yeah. So that's they put it in print. It's right there. There it is, folks. It's right there. It's software. You're the hardware.
Yep.
We can create the viruses.
Yep.
Ad infinitum.
Yep.
Chimeric viruses as well. That's these bizarre non-living things, because you can't patent life. You cannot patent life. It's illegal. Yep. So we've got to make these chimeric monsters.
That's why Dr. Martin's work tracking the patents is so fascinating.
Yes. It's exactly right. Exactly right. So tracking, creating these non-living things so that we can patent them and charge money for them. It's
and what does that do to the human, patentability, right?
Yeah.
Because if something that has been patented is altering, it is, if it's genetic material, if it's synthetic genetic material, how is that altering the natural genetic material of a human being? And then how does that become connected to some sort of ownership?
Yeah. That's the thing.
Right.
There's a really interesting publication out of University of Santa Clara on this issue of chimeric creations and patentability.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing the edge of that, the sharp edge of that conversation, right, that cutting right now, that has been cutting for some time, is the genetic mutation of plant organisms,
Wow.
GMOs, right? So that's just standard.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what a GMO is.
Sure.
Well, they're patented,
Mm-hmm.
and they're alive. And they didn't used to be patented. And they were living before they became patentable. So what's going on? Oh, we're just changing the genetic composition of the tomato. Don't worry about it. But now we own the seed, which is sterile.
And which people
So
eat.
these tomatoes won't produce seed that germinate.
Right.
So in this process, we're sterilizing food production. You know,
And people,
I think
the next component of that is that people eat them, and we don't know the full ramifications of humans eating genetically modified material.
right. Yeah, so but your argument is, again, prescient, because genetically modified humans are patentable. Because the legal system is being used to adopt the patentability of genetically modified life. That's already happened.
Right.
That's already happened. So, you know, Monsanto is a big seed owner.
Yep.
You know, the Dow Chemical is a massive seed owner because they're genetically changing the seeds. Cargill, massive seed owner, because then if you can get the farmers to buy your seed, they'll have to buy it every year because the plants don't generate fertile seed. They generate sterile seed. You have to buy seed every freaking year, rather than take 10% of your crop, rather than take 10% of your crop for your seed next year.
So back to the dependency model, which is a great business model.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
So controlling the food supply gets down to that granularity of just being able to own seed because you changed its genetic material and you had a patent on that.
Right.
Yeah. And so why? Yeah. So, you know, look forward a few years and think, well, gee, if the legal system has already been structured to allow that to happen, and ownership of seeds and plants and fruits to occur, then how big of a jump is it to argue that, well, we've now genetically modified this person here, even against his or her will.
Right. Right.
Without informed consent, which is regulatorily required.
Right. That's scary.
And now they can make an argument, look, we can do the test. I'll show that Stan over here is now genetically modified by our product. He's ours.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what will the recourse be? One, it's kind of too late. You're already modified, and now
hopefully
unwittingly so, and then they already have,
hopefully one of the counter arguments is not with humans, please.
Right.
Maybe with animals, maybe with plants, but not humans. But that's I'm not comfortable with that defense.
No, I don't think it should be with any life, because because life is sacred, as you know, we said in the beginning. Two, because it's an ecosystem and we interact with the life. You know, we're not here to just control and dominate. We are a part of it, and we interact with it. And the ways that the other life forms are interacting with us affects us. So if nothing else, selfishly, we should think that this is a bad idea. But, of course, if you care about the future of life in general and the, sanctity of life, then, even more so.
Yeah, it is troubling. And so this, of course, makes Dr. Martin's work exquisitely relevant
Yeah.
and timely, because the nature of the actions are criminal,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
so they're in the evidence of their statutory violations of the criminal code, the U.S. Criminal Code,
Right.
is irrefutable. This is something we're concerned about and that we're pursuing to stop. We in March, just last month, on March 3rd, our team filed a federal lawsuit against the Biden administration to deep six the remaining CMS mandate, which requires healthcare workers to be injected against their will if they want a job with this, stuff, this bioweapon. And the argument that they're making, fortunately, Courtenay, is based on immunity. The statutory definition under the 1986 Immunity Liability Act is, or the Viral Immunity Act, is the definition of virus is immune dependent. I'm sorry, the definition of vaccine is immune dependent.
Okay, yeah.
So that in order to qualify as a vaccine, the substance must provide immunity against a specific disease.
Right.
The data now, which is publicly ubiquitous, is that the injection does not provide immunity.
Right.
Even though they've tried to change the definition of vaccine, and the CDC has changed its definition of vaccine and
Sure.
and immunity, et cetera, to muddy that water, they haven't been able to. Actually, none of that argument matters, because the only definition that matters is one that is legislated. Unfortunately, that hasn't changed. And so the argument that we're making in the case turns on the definition of what is a vaccine. It's literally the whole case, the mandate turns on the definition of a word.
Wow.
And so we demonstrate that the injection is not a vaccine under the auspices of the 1986 Act and its definition, because the vaccine prevents transmissibility, it prevents infection and reinfection. And now we have, evidence on the record, in the public record, anywhere starting with Dr. Fauci to, the chief medical officer of the WHO, to the president of Pfizer and Moderna, saying, no, this doesn't prevent transmissibility. This doesn't obviously affect reinfectivity.
Right.
So there already are admissions that it's not consistent with a vaccine. It's actually a medical therapeutic. It would qualify as medical therapeutic under the law, which, by the way, is unconstitutional to mandate. It would be like mandating, just as an example for your audience, mandating sterility for people with mental diseases.
Wow. That's a really good example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, can't do that.
No.
So we've got a preliminary injunction motion filed in that case.
Great.
And so that, a hearing on that preliminary injunction will be coming up in the next few weeks.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I think you have a fundraiser coming up for it as well, right?
Some of that there is with the doctor. Yeah, the plaintiff in that case, Dr. Devin Greiner, who is a phenomenal doctor. He's the plaintiff. Mm-hmm. He's a plastic surgeon here in Utah. Mm-hmm. He does work with kids that have congenital defects.
Really?
Corrective surgery for children with congenital defects.
I was thinking about coming to that event. Well, now I feel like I definitely should.
please come. You need to come. You're a wonderful spokesman all the way around. He, so much of his work is with cleft palates. I mean, he's a fascinating individual as a doctor. He's humble, brilliant, humble, and just a wonderful individual. So, yeah, the case is premised on his likely losing his ability to practice because he will not be injected.
Wow.
He refuses to be injected because he says nobody can even tell you what's in the injection. Why would anybody put something in their body if they don't know what's in it?
Right.
I mean, even at the least, you go grocery shopping, you read the freaking ingredient list.
Right.
If we didn't have an ingredient list, would anybody really be willing to put that thing in their body? I mean, it's that basic. But so he says, no, I'm not getting injected. There's no rational basis for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because now we know there's no immunology involved. There's no prevention of transmissibility or infectivity. So that makes no sense. Plus, who knows what the heck's in it?
Mm-hmm.
But if anybody else wants to, fine, go ahead, make your own decision.
Sure.
But his unwillingness to be forcibly injected now is affecting his ability to practice at institutions which require injection. So he can't help kids. He can't do surgery you should see some of his work. It is exquisite. It's absolutely beautiful. He's a modern day Michelangelo because these kids with cleft palates, he makes them beautiful.
Wow.
So,
yeah, that's very dear to my heart for sure.
the hearts and minds of parents who say, who's going to stand between me and the doctor of my child?
Right.
Pardon me, because my doctor won't. So if my doctor doesn't, then he can't.
Right.
Wow.
And, the inserts are blank. So yeah, so they're pretty clear that you don't, and they don't want you to know what the ingredients are. The, very much propaganda advertising that they did.
Safe and effective.
The safe and effective, whatever that means. But they were like, I don't want to know what's in it. I don't care. I'm sticking out my arm. I'm not asking questions. I mean, that's literally, that's the advertising. And how asinine is that we wouldn't want to know what it is that we're having injected right into our bloodstream. It seems it's unfathomable to me.
Yeah, one of the people I met at the conference where we met, Courtenay, was Mary Toko.
Yes.
And, who has been combating vaccines for many years and, or at least arguing against them, their unintelligent use. And on her table, she had a display of an apple. She had a large apple with a bunch of needles in it,
Yeah,
and
that was
she was asking, here's the ingredient list of some of the vaccines that have been administered to kids. When they're born, they get, how many vaccines? Well, would you take this? If I put that material in this apple, would you eat it? Mm-hmm. Well, no. Well, then why in the world would you put it directly into your body? So yeah.
Right. It's crazy the amount of conditioning that had to occur to get people to disconnect that.
Yeah.
I don't think humans are wired to disconnect that.
No, it takes a lot of effort. It's been a very long game plan.
Very, very long game.
Very long game plan.
I have started researching Dr. Charles Lieber, and he has 50 patents, which is an insane, as you know.
That's a lot.
They're not easy to get, and they're not cheap to get. That's like an insane number for one person to have.
It is.
And they're all in the realm of nanobot technology with essentially like a payload. So, technically binary weapon type things that are administered through needles and activated through, radioactive technology. So in light of what's going on right now, I'm really fascinated by that.
Yeah, it's very interesting times.
Yeah.
So what can people do?
Yes.
Right?
That's going to be
What do we
my
do?
question.
What do we do?
Yep.
Well, one is I mentioned my friend Joe Hicks earlier. These two friends of mine that I brought to Cardiac Miracle with me, Brian Ingram and Joseph Hixson. And John said, fine. I said, but John, it'll be worth it. You'll love these guys. And so Joe grew up in a house where the first rule of the house was pay attention.
Okay.
Like if you don't hang your coat up when you come in the house, like, yo, pay attention to what you're doing. Hang your coat up,
Uh-huh.
If your shoes are dirty, take your shoes off. Like, be aware, pay attention. It's kind of like farmer style life. If you don't pay attention, you're going to lose a limb, pretty easily. Something's going to happen if you're not just present, paying attention. So people need to pay attention to what they eat, using their bodies to move, use their bodies for what they're made for, associate with people, talk with people.
Yeah.
We're social animals. And of course, part of the plan is to prevent our socialization.
Yeah, atomization.
Prevent our ability to worship together and to sing together. All these things that make life sacred are being desacralized. And so, of course, the human effect, the mental, the spiritual, the biological effect of these things is incredibly dangerous. It's really, I think, Courtenay, it's the effort is to desacralize the world. It's to make it profane, not in the sense of, in the true sense of that word, is that which is not sacred.
Yes. Well,
so,
thinking that's who rules on earth. So yeah.
Yeah. And so there are all those movements. So I would say, as a general approach to life, pay attention to the things that make life sacred and do them. Do more of them. Serve other people.
Yeah.
This whole thing about self-care is a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah.
I'm going to do better because I'm going to take care of myself. I mean, to some degree, that's true. Like, don't eat garbage.
Right.
My grandmother had this great word.
Don't eat garbage.
Great word. My grandma's word was, bless her heart, she's passed now, was stoop and touch it. Don't be a stoop and touch it. Which means like a stoop and touch it.
A stoop and touch it.
Like bending down to touch something, stooping down to touch something. Don't be a stoop and touch it.
Okay.
And I learned that, like, if that looks like dog poo and it smells like dog poo, it's dog poo. Don't touch it. Don't stoop and touch it, It's like, don't be a stoop and touch it. Don't be, use your senses. Think. Use your senses, synthesize your thoughts and the data that you're receiving, think and act appropriately. Pay attention. And which is it's related to the other injunction I received from my father anytime I was like in my adolescent years, leaving to go do something. He'd say, well, okay, come back. Don't be stupid. That was the direction. Don't be stupid.
Don't be stupid.
Just don't do anything stupid.
Right.
Which requires you to pay attention and don't be a stoop and touch it. Just be aware of your circumstances, right? Very pragmatic. Yeah. And so the doing things that we know what makes life sacred because when we do them, we feel good.
Yeah.
And so, there is a degree to which we care for ourselves so that we can be healthy. But the purpose of being of caring for ourselves is so we can serve others.
Yes.
Which makes life worth it.
Right. Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
And so part of the solution of taking care of ourselves so that we can serve others. Here's a story I haven't shared this. So I have a friend who, his name's Garrett. He grew up in Compton, a white boy growing up in Compton.
Can be tough.
Yeah, and picked up every bad habit that you could possibly pick up. Ultimately found himself surrounded by a bunch of guys, you know, carrying guns one night. He just kind of came to himself, like, what am I doing in this room? Everybody's packing heat, including me. How's this good?
Right.
Changed his life radically. Radically. He's now one of the most disciplined people I know, because he's had prior substance abuse and everything, and now he's one of the healthiest guys I know. And we would, for a few years, we met every other Saturday to talk about, to spend 2 or 3 hours together to ask the question, what did you learn this week?
Wow.
What have you learned? And he came in on a Saturday afternoon. I remember he came to my house and we sat down. And I said, how have you developed and maintained your discipline, your dietary discipline? Mm-hmm. Because he used to be terribly overweight and terribly sick because of all that, just the drugs, everything that he'd done. And now he was just he was a picture of man, you know. He was fit and clear-minded and just a beautiful human. He had made this massive transformation. Says, so how do you maintain that discipline? And he says, well, it's the best. He said, I eat to serve others, not my own. I eat to serve others, not to feed my own tongue.
Wow. That's so
and I thought that's, you know, please repeat that. Because, you know, a lot of people, if there's a weight issue, we want to increase the functionality of our body, we usually call that, well, you need to go on a diet, or, you know, we have words for that are trigger words, you know, that are built to cause certain thoughts. But I'd never heard the issue of dietary practices put in the terms of human service.
It's so profound.
Yeah, because he had a new child, his first child, and he says, when I get home, I want to feel invigorated. I want the whites of my eyes to be bright. Yeah. And I want to have energy so that I can engage with my son and engage with my wife rather than being blown out at the end of the day. So I eat so that I can serve. And that idea of service dominates and indicates what it is I'm going to ingest at any particular time of the day, because I know how I feel if I eat this, and I know how it happens if I eat that. So I thought that was, do I eat for the services of others, not for the pleasure of my own tongue? And I thought that's a principle to which people could make a commitment, as opposed to, well, I'm going to eat so many calories today, which has no moral anchor.
No moral anchor, and it's not very effective because it doesn't teach you anything.
Right.
I mean, I've worked a lot I've done nutrition and, you know, personal training. Yeah. So I've worked with a lot of people over the years, and, you know, most people come in very fixed on an aesthetic goal. And, you know, I don't, you know, denigrate that. I mean, I think we should all want to look and feel our best. Like that's great. You want to improve, but no matter how much people think it's a shiny object, it's a thing they think they really want, but it's not a deep enough motivator. It's actually very, very superficial, and it doesn't get to the core of why they want to make the changes. And so therefore it's not going to sustain them when they come across the challenges that make it difficult. When the reasons why they don't have their, you know, desired goal currently arise, they don't have the coping mechanism to combat them. And so what I typically work on is like, how are we going to make specific lifestyle changes? Because those are sustainable and those are habits that you build. But it is about, I always say for me, like movement for me is so that when I'm, in my later years where I'm told that I should be in a rocking chair and never, do anything, that I can still like climb ropes and I can, I want to be able to do that because it gives me joy. So I don't think about it in terms of, the immediate instant gratification or superficial kind of, again, not because there's anything wrong with that, but because it's not sustainable. And, when you talk about like a metric of calories, like we have so little way of actually really accurately tracking that anyway. And you talked about earlier with, prayer for meals and how it's sacred. The digestion of the body actually starts in the brain. It starts before because our ancient, our ancestors were primal. So they didn't go to a supermarket and have their food like sitting on the table, or a restaurant. So much of that process began when they had to figure out what they were hunting or the berries they were collecting, so a lot of that, their bodies were signaling already the enzymes because of the, gut brain axis, and it's a feedback loop. And I think that the mindfulness of that component, whether you're religious or not, like prayer is before meals is actually incredibly helpful, not just spiritually. I mean, sure, there's, if you're religious, the spiritual component of it, but even in terms of your physiological, biological processes, because it gives you time to acknowledge and to appreciate and to signal to your body what's about to happen. So,
yeah. And isn't it interesting that that is a fact?
Yeah.
That's how things work. So yeah, do things in your life that make it worth it. The recognition of the sacred in other people. C.S. Lewis, has a marvelous short essay called "The Weight of Glory," and in that there's a marvelous sentence in that essay where he says, nobody knows a mere mortal.
Nobody knows a what?
A mere mortal.
Oh, right.
He says, basically, we are not mere mortals, and that if we could see each other in our true character, we would fain kneel to recognize each other's glory.
Wow.
And it's a beautiful contribution that he made to the reason that we serve each other, in recognizing the sacred in each other. Yeah. Which actually helps us recognize the sacred in ourselves.
Sure. If you recognize the sacred in others, and if you want to be of service to others, then you recognize the miracle in yourself. Yeah. I always say that we have a 1 in 400 trillion chance of being born.
Wow.
It's astounding, right? So
it is astounding.
There's literally a miracle just to be here. That's a miracle. Yeah. So I always tell people they should act like it,
Act like it, yeah.
Act like it. You're a miracle. Well, I think we went over your time, so I do want to be respectful. I apologize for that. This was really, really awesome.
I've had fun.
Yeah,
it's been a joy to speak to you.
Pardon?
It's been a joy to be with you.
Likewise. So if you have anything else you want to add, and definitely tell people where they can find you, where they can find your products. Yeah,
I would encourage people to the website where you can find this nitric oxide product, Cardio Miracle, is cardiomiracle.com. And go there. And Courtney, you and I would encourage people to do what Courtney and I have done, is maybe a lot of you have done it too, is be your own lab rat. See what works. I would encourage you to try because I can't make any statements about the product. The FDA actually regulates, how we can talk together as humans about our own health and our own bodies, whatever. But in order to avoid any challenges from them, we'll play by the rules for a little while. Try it and experience what it feels like when your body says thank you instead of what the heck are you doing? To me, you can actually provide an invitation to your body to enhance its biological performance, and it's marvelous. So yeah, cardiomiracle.com and give it a try. We have a money back guarantee. The website says, Courtney, that it's 60 days. I don't put a time limit on it. If you're not happy with how you feel, if you're not seeing more unicorns and more rainbows in your life, after 30 years, 60 days, just give us a call and we'll give you your money back and say, darn it, maybe it's something else. But it's fabulous. It's been a great blessing to work with John. His mission actually is to heal the hearts of men and women. And this company for him is a mission.
Yeah, literally.
So everything, so we get to live in that sacred space all the time because what we do in the service of others. So
beautiful. I love it. Thank you. And thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for the invite, Courtney. You're fascinating. I've shared your story with a few of my children.
Did you?
Yeah.
Wow. And what was their response?
One of the ways that we serve each other is as a parent. At a certain point in time, sometimes your kids, you become less relevant as a point of information, And so you become very grateful for people who live in a way that is inspiring and dynamic, where they've accomplished what they were told was impossible. So that when the time's right, you can share those people's story with them. And it's not your experience, it's somebody else's. It's somebody else who's chosen to live the life of sacred practices that can lift the life of countless other people. Because you particularly, you've demonstrated, and I think I would say you demonstrate daily, given the conditions with which you were born with, that we need to redefine the impossible.
Yes, I love that so much. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that with me. Yeah.
So it's an honor to know you.
Likewise. All right. Well, we will continue. Maybe we'll reconvene. Yes.